So, Jojo Rabbit. This film has been. It's been referred to, I think, by a few people as a Moonreich Kingdom, which is actually a pretty apt description of the film. You know, it's essentially a childhood romance centered around Nazi Germany. Now, obviously, you know, this is directed by Taika Waititi, and it's been branded as a satire about hate. So obviously, it's making fun of the Nazis. So you can expect lots of Nazi jokes here, as well as, you know, because they have that kind of, that kind of classic rock vibe that they establish in the trailers and all that, which is present in the film as well. They also establish a kind of like coming of age childhood romance going on at the same time. And clearly one is better than the other here. So we follow 10-year-old Jojo, who's played here by Roman Griffith Davis, who essentially he aspires to be a great Nazi. He's living in Germany, and it's kind of like the last days of the Nazis around these parts. But the Nazis are still remaining strong. They're like, yeah, we're still okay. Okay, we're okay. You know, everyone's closing in around on us. You know, we've got limited people and resources, and we're losing the battle. But hey, you know, everything's fine. Don't worry, kids. It's all good. So he ends up going to a Nazi camp where a captain played by Sam Rockwell, who is pretty bitter about having to teach kids because he's been injured in the war, so now he can't go fight on the front lines. So he's a little bit of a drunk, but he he sucks it up, and he's like, okay, I'll teach the kids everything it means to be a Nazi. Like, I'll teach them lies about Jews, and I'll teach them how to fight and how to fight dirty and stuff like that. You know, I'll teach them all the ins and outs. But the thing is, Jojo doesn't learn most of what he loves about being a Nazi from like Sam Rockwell. He learns it from Hitler, or rather, an imaginary version of Hitler played by Taika Waititi. Now Taika pretty much plays up Hitler as kind of like the goofy imaginary friend type version of Hitler. You know, he's not seen as like strict or looking down on him. He always seems like that kind of like goofy best friend. Who always seems like he has the right stuff to say. Like, you know, he's like the hero's champion here, except he's like championing, you know, obviously, you know, hate-filled stuff, but he tries to make it seem, you know, chummy, like, you know, like kids would like him. Like, he tries to come up to Jojo, he's like, oh, what's wrong, Jojo? And it's like, well, I feel like I don't matter. It's like, oh, that's not true in my world and such. And it's done up to be, you know, obviously very, very satirical about, you know, the way that Hitler functions. But the problem is that because Jojo listens to Hitler, he gets inspired to kind of like take charge and say like, yeah, I'm going to prove something of myself. And he ends up getting into an accident. And the accident leaves him kind of like scarred in the face, and he can barely walk. And now he's kind of like questioning his role in the world. Like, what more does he have to do? Because like he banked himself on being, you know, kind of like this perfect German soldier, you know, like, you know, kind of like, you know, blonde hair and perfect complexion, and now he doesn't have that anymore. So now he's like, well, what do I do here? So he tries to find stuff to do around his town to kind of support the Nazi party, but then he discovers that there's a Jewish girl living in his wall, Elsa Kor, who's played by Thomas Mackenzie. And they kind of have like this weird little romance that forms. And you can pretty much guess how this is going to play out. You know, Jojo is going to believe like, you know, he's the powerful Nazi and that he can defeat the Jews. But then a Jew shows up and he's terrified. And he doesn't know what to do with her, and he doesn't understand her. And so they try to understand one another. You can see pretty much where this is going. So there's a weird balance here. I mean, a little bit of a surreal balance here between, you know, the horrors of war from the Nazis and the silliness of like embracing this kind of like ignorance from hate. So kind of like keeping the sweetness within Jojo's life is his mother, Rosie, played by Scarlett Johansson. And she essentially, she's not about the Nazis. She's just like, whatever, you know, it's just, that's politics. You know, they're probably going to lose anyway. Then the war will be over, and thank goodness, because, you know, I've kind of already lost this kid's father to war. So the sooner this war can end, the better. So she tries to keep his life chipper. You know, she teaches him how to tie his shoes. She dances with him. She plays little games with him. They have little fun outings to the park and stuff like that. They have bike rides. So they establish this very, very, very charming family element that adds to the sweetness, obviously, of him, you know, taking this charm and, you know, giving it back to Elsa. And I like that they establish this So that by the time when we do get to, the eventual end of the film where, we can pretty much see where all this is going, that it does actually kind of pack a punch, so that there's something to lose here. There's an interesting mixture of kind of like tension and comedy throughout. Like there's one scene where the Gestapo obviously, come in to like search the place and look for any signs of Jews around the place. And the way that, obviously the Gestapo are played up for laughs, but at the same time, there's this tension about what if they'll discover this girl, and if they discover this girl, what are they going to do to Jojo? What are they going to do to his mother? And so it walks this very fine line of dark comedy. Now this film has been, most of like the ads I've been seeing for this film have been, pushing, Taika, playing up Hitler as like the goof. But the thing about this film is I kind of love the fact that he's not in the film as much, because it becomes pretty clear where the strength of this film is, and it's more in the romance between Roman and Thomason. Is it Thomason? Yeah, Thomason McKenzie and Rowan Griffin Davis. Clearly, they have some chemistry. It's cute to watch them together. Their romance carries the picture, and thankfully we follow most of that. The whole stuff with like Taika acting as the imaginary version of Hitler is kind of mostly side plot. It's kind of like, like off in the distance, and it becomes pretty clear why, because when we do actually, show Jojo around the Nazis and talking about the war and what they think about Jews and how they hypnotize them and powers, it's all pretty surface level Nazi satire stuff. It's like, yeah, we're supposed to laugh at them, but they're very easy laughs. Like, they tell like ridiculous stories about Jews being gypsies, and they got devil horns and stuff like that, and that the best way to handle a Jew is to tell someone about it, but then we might, kill everyone associated with that Jew, and then maybe some other people who maybe kind of sort of might be associated. It's like, okay, these are fairly simple, obvious, Nazi jokes. Mel Brooks has done so many better ones that I think like the bar should be set just a little bit high. But it's clear that this film isn't really going that high for political commentary. It's really just kind of using this whole like satirical Nazi angle as kind of like background dressing for the childhood romance, which like I said, again, the perfect description of the film, Moonreich Kingdom, makes perfect sense here, because clearly Moonreich Kingdom was more about the romance than actual camping, obviously. Now, there are still a few laughs in here, but they're mostly just kind of like one-note simplistic laughs. Like Sam Rockwell always kind of has like this drunken stagger to him. Rebel Wilson plays this teacher who's just kind of like pretty much just like the gossip girl of the Nazis, who's constantly just, talking, like I heard that this Jew did such and such and all that. And then you have Jojo's little friend here, Yorkie, who's played by Archie Yates, who's kind of just fulfilling the cute kid role of just kind of like that one kid who goes off to war, and he doesn't really think much of it, just kind of like shrugs it off, just like, oh yeah, I've heard we're losing the war, we're winning the war, and he'll think nothing of going into battle with a gun or a bazooka, because he just thinks that that's what you do. When you join the Nazis, you just accept what the adults tell you, even if some of the adults will strap grenades to your back and just shove you into the crowd for you to die for your country. There's clearly a big focus here, I think, on the power of imagination, because it's Jojo's imagination that forms Hitler and forms his basis for how he views like the Jewish people, and then it's later that imagination that is fueled by Elsa that clearly helps him better understand the world and come more to terms with it. So the initial like conception might be that imagination is dangerous, especially since because most of the stuff they're talking about with Jews here is obviously dreamed up. But at the same time, it also shows off how if you have like a better imagination, you can make the world a better place. Like clearly they establish like Sam Rockwell's character does sympathize with Jojo because he has been damaged in war. He knows what it feels like to be left behind and that you don't really serve a purpose. And so he kind of sticks up for Jojo, and he has a big imagination too. Like he drives up these ridiculous drawings about a suit that he wants to wear into combat and thinks it'll look all all colorful and elegant. And clearly he kind of turns into a good guy by the end in terms of basically keeping Jojo safe. So they kind of have that fatherly bond there. Um, but like I said, it's mostly kind of one joke, because for as much as imagination, Jojo's imagination kind of helps him avoid being killed off in the war and helps him cope with it a little bit too. Again, the Nazi jokes are just one note throughout. So they're very easy laughs. You won't have to worry about some of this stuff going over your head. If you've got a base knowledge of this type of stuff, it should be fairly funny. It's just like I felt like the jokes could have been like there could have been so much more here. It feels like they got all these characters dressed up and set up this whole environment in this in World War II, and setting up the Nazis and then the Jew paranoia. That I feel like there could have been a little bit more here. It feels like there are certain scenes where it kind of feels like they just let the actors run with kind of like the expected gags that you'd expect from this kind of setting. I mean, that being said, I'm very torn on the picture, because anytime it was trying for Nazi jokes, I was just kind of like, all right, that's not a bad joke, but I'm pretty sure I've heard that one somewhere before, and probably better. But then when we actually cut back to more of Jojo's romance, and his friendship, and his connection to his mother, then I think the film really brings out more of its heart, and then it kind of like maintains focus. And I love that they just kind of like push most of the Nazi stuff towards the background the further we go, because clearly the heart and soul of this film relies on Jojo and Elsa, and I'm glad that they kind of carried the picture, because they definitely are the stars. It's just it feels like it could be saying more here. So for Jojo Rabbit, 3 out of 5 stars.